Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to this session hosted by the PCC. My name is Jacques Higu. I'm one of the Labour Commissioners in the PCC, and it's my absolute privilege this afternoon to welcome everybody on board. This webinar is about the short-term private sector-led employment strategy for Mpumalanga that has seen a lot of attention in the last couple of months and last couple of years. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a esteemed team that will take us through the report in their presentation. We will then ask some stakeholder perspectives from three key role players within that arena. But firstly, allow me to just welcome everybody on board this afternoon. All protocol observed. Special word of thank you to Prof. Dr. Crispian for being on board as well. And ladies and gentlemen, it's now my privilege to introduce to you Ms. Lebogang Molohisi. She's our Presidential Climate Commission COO. Without any further ado, Lebogang, thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. Thank you very much for the introductory remarks. Just to echo what you have just said in terms of welcoming everybody to today's webinar. We'll be doing a deep dive in terms of the short-term private sector-led employment strategy from Mpumalanga. As Jacques has already mentioned, my name is Lebogang Molohisi, and I'm part of the Presidential Climate Commission Secretariat. For those who are not aware on this particular platform, what is the Presidential Climate Commission? Who are we? Just to quickly mention that we are a commission that is independent, statutory multi-stakeholder body, which was established by the President with the purpose of overseeing and facilitating a just and equitable transition towards a low emissions and climate resilient economy in South Africa. Just to mention that the Commission brings together government, business, labor, academia, youth, traditional leaders, and civil society in dialogue over these issues, and a big chunk of it relates to issues related to the employment strategy. I'd like to quickly take us through some key points about today's report that we'll be looking at. And just to mention that it was commissioned by the Presidential Climate Commission to look into private sector-led employment creation opportunities in Mpumalanga that could be realized by 2030. This report presents findings as the basis for consultation with social partners, following with which further research can be conducted into the sectors that have been identified. I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't mention that this report is prepared in collaboration with Genesis Analytics. Genesis, the team, in fact, from Genesis will also have an opportunity to speak in today's session, and they will be presenting some insights in terms of the report that we're looking at today. So just to mention that the purpose of this report is to support planning and implementation in the Mpumalanga province in dealing with high levels of unemployment. The report does delve into the socio-economic context as well as the challenges of three district municipalities in Mpumalanga, which are Ehlanzeni, Gersibande, as well as Nkangala. Well, even though coal mining and coal utilities are not the biggest employers in Mpumalanga, they remain sizable industries. Around 87% of South Africa's coal production, which is around 231 million tons of coal per annum, is mined in Mpumalanga. And there are 11 coal-fired power stations in the province. So a transition away from coal has the potential to deepen existing socioeconomic challenges within the region. The report identifies broadly seven opportunities with the greatest job creating potential. And within those seven, it identifies three that comes from the existing economy, and these include growing the wood value chain, growing the citrus and citrus processing value chain, as well as growing the tourism value chain. The second part looks at the opportunities that exist in new economic opportunities where South Africa can either develop a outright competitive or a relative competitive advantage. And these include the production and processing of industrial hemp, the development of sustainable aviation fuel industry, the development of the global business service industry, as well as stimulating a market for agrivoltaics in farming. The report delves deep into the identified opportunities, and I really would encourage everyone on the call to actually go through the report in detail. It does a great job of highlighting the opportunities that exist and the important next steps for the Mpumalanga government, as well as other role players. But in terms of the Mpumalanga government, the next steps include the identification of partners and service providers, the identification of sector participants that can participate in these opportunities, supporting regulatory change, facilitating financial support for R&D, as well as facilitating financial support for pioneering projects. I think another thing to take note of, and the report does highlight this, is that there are opportunities that do exist in terms of grant funding that is available through the JET implementation plan. Just to remind colleagues on today's call that the JET implementation plan was released in 2023, and it sets out the governance structures and a range of implementation mechanisms for all JET IP portfolios. Around $756 million has been pledged as grant funding for the implementation across all JET implementation plan portfolios, and around 26% of this grant funding is earmarked for just transition projects in Mpumalanga in support of the transition away from coal dependence. So around these opportunities that have been identified, there is an enabling environment in terms of grant funding and support in order to be able to unlock the challenges. But we know it's not as simple as the provision of financing. There is a number of enabling environments that need to be unlocked in order to get these particular opportunities to get to a position where they are matured, and South Africa can take advantage of those, and the Mpumalanga region in itself can take advantage of those opportunities. I think the last thing that I want to mention in this section, that the rehabilitation of mining land for agriculture seems to be quite key and a common thread with some of the opportunities that have been identified in this study. So it would be great to hear in the responses back from the colleagues that will be reflecting, the stakeholders that will be reflecting back on these opportunities, and how we can unlock the opportunities in mine rehabilitation quite quickly in order to bring these opportunities online, so that we're able to fully take advantage of the opportunities identified in today's study. So with those remarks, I'd like to welcome everyone, particularly the commissioners who are joining us today in this discussion, and I'm looking forward to hear the responses that come from the various stakeholders. Thank you.
Lebogang, as always, very professional, and thank you for setting the scene for today's discussion. And I guess before we dig into the report, when I read through the report, there were a few things that came to mind, and I guess the team of Genesis Analytics will take us through that. Is that Mpumalanga currently has a population of about 4.7 million people, so that's a lot of people. There are 3 main district municipalities in Mpumalanga, that most of the work has been focused on. And Mpumalanga's share of the national GDP increased slightly over the past decade. And I think it's important for this report to highlight how can we then sustain that increase over time. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my privilege to welcome the team of the Genesis Analytics on board. And I'm going to ask Kim Adona, she's the lead in terms of the research, to kindly come to the fore and take us through the report. Kim, you can, as you go along, introduce your team. I've noted on the program that there's a number of your team members that have been highlighted in the program. So feel free to introduce them as and when you progress through your presentation. And it's now my privilege to hand over to you. You've got 35 minutes. When you see my face, it's the unfriendly one that reminds you about time. Thank you, Kim.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jacques, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon to take you through the key findings of the work that we've been very privileged to do on behalf of the PCC and for the Mpumalanga government. You can go to the next slide. Maybe just quickly to introduce myself. My name is Kim Adona. I'm a principal at Genesis Analytics, and I was the lead for this piece of research. You'll also have the privilege of meeting all of the lead researchers. They will be presenting each of the opportunities to you in a fair amount of detail. Maybe just to preface this research, to preface the presentation that we're doing today, the purpose of this report is essentially to highlight opportunities for the PCC and for Mpumalanga provincial government, that opportunities that we believe can support private sector growth. Something that is very important to note is that this is not intended to be an overarching employment strategy as such. Our research was very focused and very targeted, looking specifically at demand-led opportunities that can be taken forward within a private sector context. And the time frame for this is also, we were looking for things that could realize opportunities and realize employment more in the short term. Our approach and starting the study was to go from a top-down approach. So initially looking at the economy of Mpumalanga, as the chair outlined, looking at the composition of the Mpumalanga economy, and looking at it from a data perspective, and then going into a lot more detail, which we will take you through today. We looked at this from two different perspectives. So on the right-hand side, you'll see we looked at established industries, areas where Mpumalanga already has a foothold, and areas where there is already competitive advantage that does exist. And we asked the question, how can this be further enhanced? And we came up with three different areas, the wood value chain, the citrus value chain, and tourism. And then on the left-hand side, we broadened the scope and the lens and looked at within the context of a changing world and a world that is going through transition, what are some of the industries that are emerging that could offer future potential? And within that realm, we looked at industrial hemp, sustainable aviation fuel, and agrivoltaics. Now you'll see that we have put a box around the first four opportunities, those being hemp, sustainable aviation fuel, wood, and citrus. And these were the sectors where we chose to really do a deep dive analysis, and that is the topic of today's discussion. The methodology that we used was very much a mixed methods approach, as I mentioned, to go into a fair amount of detail on the granularity of the data that is available for these different sectors. And a very important caveat is that when you go into such granular detail, and especially at a provincial and district municipality level, information and data is very difficult and one of the key challenges. We enriched our analysis by speaking to stakeholders quite broadly, so speaking to the private sector, consulting with subject matter experts, and that proved to enrich our work quite substantially. In addition to that, we also held validation workshops. This was facilitated by the PCC with subject matter experts, and this work was done in alignment with Mpumalanga provincial government. We had their involvement right from the beginning and throughout the project. So we wanted to ensure that the output that is produced is useful and meaningful to the provincial government. I am now, one final thing from my side, we are not, this work is not the result of primary data collection, and it is also not intended to be a feasibility study of sorts. So this is very much the beginning of a piece of work that could be taken over by private sector, by government, to further deepen and actually package something into an opportunity that can then be implemented. So with that, I'm going to hand over, can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, we are going to be presenting each of the opportunities, and we are starting with industrial hemp. My colleagues, Paul Jorgensen. Paul Jackson will be presenting on industrial hemp. Over to you, Paul.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks. Good to see you all here today. So this is a much shortened version of the detailed report. And so we're trying to give you sort of a snapshot of the essence of the analysis and the findings. It's good to start with an explanation of what it is we're talking about. Hemp is part of the cannabis sativa plant. It's a strain of the cannabis sativa plant. But the major difference here, of course, is that it has a low THC content. So that's a key distinguishing factor. So when we're talking about hemp and we talk about industrial hemp, we're talking about it for industrial purposes, and there's a range of purposes that I'm going to go through today. But we are not talking about medicinal hemp, medicinal cannabis, or hemp for medicinal purposes due to the low THC content. So why hemp and what is special about hemp? So hemp is an incredibly versatile plant, and it's actually been grown for centuries across the world. There are a variety of uses and benefits attached to its growing. So it has over 20,000 known uses in different product applications. It has relatively low input requirements in comparison to other crops. Very resilient, so can grow in quite difficult and stressful environments. Useful for beneficial for soil remediation, and as well as phytoremediation soil, which is a particularly interesting dynamic in the Mpumalanga context. High cellulose content, which means that it can be used in a range of applications again, and strong carbon capture capabilities. So these are the general advantages of hemp, and it is seen by many as a wonder plant. The key element of which is, does it have relevance to Mpumalanga? Can it be grown sustainably and have and live up to its reputation as a wonder plant? This is a easy to digest way of understanding the product categories that hemp is used in. So farming, so the actual farming for the purpose of seed multiplication, as well as deliberately as a carbon sequestration tool. For foods, used as input into foods for humans, but also for animals too. So in feeds, like for example, soybean cake, similar kind of outcome in that regard. Fibers, so it's been used in fibers in a variety of applications, ranging so clothing, textiles, all the way up to bioplastics and the like, and fractions. So this is in pharmaceuticals, traditional medicines, nutraceuticals, solvents, lubricants, and a range of other applicants. Again, so this would be the oils parts, and that inclusive of the cannabidiol, the CBD. Again, this is low THC, but known to have a range of benefits in that context. Next slide, please. So why are we even considering Mpumalanga? So besides the reality that this is hardy plants that has multiple applications, all parts of the plant can be used to great effect in a variety of applications. The question is, what is the relevance to Mpumalanga? Now, Mpumalanga is not known to be a center of hemp cultivation. That has generally been the preserve of the Eastern Cape and KZN, but more recently we have hemp permits have been issued. There is a growing momentum in this regard. The market for hemp, in particular the regulatory elements, have been dramatically shifting and improving over time. In fact, since this report was written, it has changed. And so there are elements of our analysis that are already out of date by virtue of the changing regulatory environment. But Mpumalanga is well known for being a center of large amounts of arable land. And so there's a great opportunity for hemp to be used in a crop rotation context. There are also large areas of land which have been degraded by virtue of the coal mining activity that has happened in Mpumalanga. So there are large tracts of land which could be put to productive use, either in a crop rotation context. So for example, there's 2 million hectares of land in Mpumalanga that needs to be rotated. And quite often one sees that lying fallow until the next planting season. There is also opportunity for phytoremediation of the degraded soil in the Mpumalanga context. Theoretically, there are suitable agricultural conditions. A bit depends on the particular cultivar that is being used. Hemp is quite sensitive to, it's called photosensitive, and so it prefers a longer day, but in theory is actually suitable in the context in Mpumalanga. There's also proximity to local markets. So Mpumalanga does benefit from being close to Gauteng, which has a number of processing industries, but industries within Mpumalanga itself that could make use of parts of and beneficiated parts of the hemp plant, ranging from food and as for humans as well as animals, building materials, pulp, paper, and cellulose, textiles and fabrics, and automotives. The automotives element being in Gauteng, but these are all in large industries that could theoretically either engage in some product substitution or R&D to extend and expand product lines. Next slide, please. So there's limited, to date, there's been limited data on the number of jobs that could possibly be created in the hemp industry, because it is a nascent industry in South Africa, especially if we're talking about it from an industrial hemp perspective. So what you see here is a snapshot, an attempt to sort of characterize what is possible. But ultimately, the number and type of jobs that could be created would be dependent on the direction in which the private sector takes. So the number of jobs that could be created for fiber applications versus seed applications versus whole plant processing for CBD oil, each have very different growing and cultivation requirements, as well as processing requirements. So we're strong believers in the fact that government should be creating an enabling environment for the private sector to then be able to take risks and to make bets in segments, in this case, segments of the hemp value chain that they believe to be most beneficial and commercially viable. So, given that preamble, our view is if we just take a pure phytoremediation perspective, and assuming that 10% of that mine land could be rehabilitated, we're looking at roughly 24,000 jobs, direct jobs that could be created. That being one job per hectare, for example. A decortication facility, which is really fiber applications, does create a modest number of jobs, and this is part of the course in when you're comparing agriculture to manufacturing, that the jobs obviously are going to be more modest in the processing side than the cultivation side, assuming that it's not a heavily mechanized process. The more that one is shifting towards the fiber side of production, the more mechanized it's likely to be, the more one's shifting towards seed production and growing the hemp for the purposes of the flowers, which is the core sort of locus or the largest part of the CBD oil, the greater the job creation. So there is a range of jobs created based on the cultivation requirements and the processing requirements. Next slide, please. So what are the big scale recommendations here? And the first thing to bear in mind is that this is a new industry. And so with any new industry, it actually does require sustained government support over a long period of time. And that is tackled as an industrial policy challenge. This isn't a once-off, let's do a one-time feasibility study and throw some money behind it and it's going to succeed. It requires a number of joined up dots to take place, a few moving parts that need to be organized in concert in order to achieve the necessary outcomes. Again, government's role is really to catalyze investment and support risk-taking on the part of the private sector instead of intervening directly in the market. So first of all, historically what's happened is that the industry has depended on the importation of seeds from outside of South Africa at great cost. So quite high cost due to forex as well as transportation requirements, certainly more than would be the case if there was a large-scale seed industry that was local to South Africa. So supporting large-scale hemp seed, in particular multiplication, would be a useful and important part of the value chain to reduce those input costs, and in particular seeking to multiply those seeds that are adapted and most appropriate for Mpumalanga's conditions and the product end markets again, so depending on what those product end markets are. Secondly, is supporting proof of concept projects. So proving that indeed hemp is massively beneficial for the phytoremediation of degraded mine land, it as a excellent alternative crop rotation in different Mpumalanga regions. As I mentioned earlier, there are large tracts of land that could benefit from this, especially in the maize industry. Thirdly, supporting R&D for new product development and product substitution in existing Mpumalanga industries. So there are existing industries, animal feed, textiles, fabrics, pulp and paper, and cellulose, that if given the necessary R&D incentives to explore the possibility of using hemp as an input to their industrial processes, this could be a game changer. And then fourthly, supporting processing capacity. So supporting those private sector entities that are willing to take a bet on processing capacity, which would in turn enable the farmers and those who cultivate to take on the risk of actually planting, because they have a market, at least an intermediate market within to which to send that produce. Lastly, there are some broad kind of enabling things that need to happen, that need to be supported. One is, given the fact that it is a new industry, government can play an important role in systematically in collecting information that is going to generate a greater understanding of what the opportunities are and what the dynamics are and what the regulations are. It's a fast-moving industry. What was illegal 1 year ago is no longer illegal. What was required in terms of fencing of the property is no longer required. So there is a changing environment, and the private sector needs to be brought on board to understand what that changing environment is, where the regulatory regime is headed, and where the fruitful markets are to enable private sector actors to take that risk. Secondly, to the extent relevant, because it is such a changing environment, support or finalize key local regulations. Some of these, as I said, have already shifted and changed, but that would require, it's an ongoing piece of work to create a more enabling environment so that private sector actors can take the necessary risks. And lastly, fill any gaps that may exist, especially when it comes to carbon offset standards. If indeed HEB has fantastic carbon sequestration properties, it's our understanding that there are some gaps in that regime, and this would be useful to support that, especially in the context of Mpumalanga, given its mining environment and the state of play in terms of degraded land. I think that's it from me in terms of HEB. Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Paul. The second opportunity that we're presenting is sustainable aviation fuel. I'm going to be handing over to Paul Jorgensen, followed by Paul Jackson again. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Next slide. So, sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, has seen increasing demand in a global context, mostly because of the pressure that is under the aviation sector to really think around their transition to low carbon fuel types or technology types. And SAF is seen as a immediate sort of opportunity in the absence of a technological shift in the aviation sector, as it's chemically equivalent to kerosene. And that enables SAF to be effectively what they call dropped in to the existing fuel supply chains and to be used within aircraft engines without much modification. For the context of Mpumalanga or the South Africa region, it's really thinking around the possible pathways in which SAF can be produced. And there are five possible pathways where the waste feedstocks will vary and in terms of production of SAF. I won't go into too much detail on these processes in the interest of time, but just importantly to note that all of these options are viable solutions within the context of Mpumalanga, given sort of either the availability of feedstock or an established process technology type that exists within the region. There are trade-offs between these processes and thinking around yield, so your liters per ton, and then obviously your cost per liter in terms of being able to achieve scale, but also cost efficiencies within that. Next slide. So why is this a promising opportunity for Mpumalanga? Well, obviously the province has energy industry relevance, obviously given the location of our energy production, but also Sasol, which is a leader in the Fischer-Tropsch process, which is one of the processing opportunities to create SAF, and it's a world leader in that space, and they have a large-scale industrial complex already in Secunda that is able to switch to jet fuel from a SAF perspective. Agricultural conditions are really suitable. It's a high-yielding agricultural province with wood, sugarcane in the province, and there's also some research around the suitability of growing the Solaris plant, which is an oilseed plant which can be used in the conversion to SAF. There's also land and feedstock availability. When we think around marginal mine land, what do we do with this? How do we close some of the mines or factor this into rehabilitation? And there's an opportunity for non-food oilseed crops to be grown on land. There's an existing sugarcane industry, existing forestry industry within the province that could be leveraged as a feedstock source. And also importantly, thinking around our biodiversity targets as a country and thinking around invasive alien plant biomass and potential availability of this as a feedstock in the conversion to SAF. And then also around our off-gas opportunities with heavy industry situated in Mpumalanga. Proximity to markets, obviously Aratambo being our main international airport, and sort of a demand for airlines to have SAF within their fuel mix, but also an opportunity for export through Maputo Seaport into Singapore and Japan. And then lastly, it's around opportunity for financing. So particularly with the demand around sort of jet funding availability, and there's lots of opportunity to finance some of these more intensive processing options for SAF. Next slide, and I'll hand back to Paul Jackson.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. So again, this being in fact, non-existent industry in South Africa, it's difficult to estimate the job creation potential. A key source of our information on this research is the Worldwide Fund for Nature's report. It was a blueprint for sustainable aviation fuel that looked at the production potential in South Africa. And so what this just reflects is that report took a national level view and looked at implementing all of those pathways to sustainable aviation fuel. So the ones that you saw before, which was alcohol to jet, it was the hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids, HEFA, lignocellulosic waste, was the off gas related to industrial processes. And they estimated that if the country was to take a big bet and implement it on a grand scale, what would the job creation look like at different points in that value chain? We then distilled that to what did they say about Mpumalanga, and what would that mean for the Mpumalanga context if Mpumalanga was to take that big bet and implement all those different pathways within the province. And so you can see that's an estimated 25,000 direct jobs. The largest driver of that being the HEFA jobs, and they used as an example a feedstock plant there, in that case being the Solaris plant. Again, like with the industrial hemp scenario, the number and type of jobs that could be created would be dependent on the choices that are made. In terms of the technological pathways. Each pathway has different dynamics, different job creation potential. So oilseed, for example, and the HEFA pathway has the largest job creation potential. The least job creation potential would be the alcohol to jet pathways, but they would play an important role in terms of looking after and saving what is potentially going to be a sunset industry in the sugar industry if the trend continues over the next few decades. One thing that I thought was worth pointing out, and it could be pointed out in all of these opportunities that have any kind of cultivation angle, is that Mpumalanga in particular, but South Africa as a whole, being a water scarce country, does indeed suffer from water availability issues and the amount of allocation, the water allocation available. And sorry, I got distracted by the comment. And so we also provided some more information on what it would take to increase water availability in the region through, in this case, treating mine-affected water, and what that would mean in terms of the water positive impact, freeing up more water availability, but also the jobs that would created in the water treatment plants. Next slide. So we've grouped the next steps into 4 main categories. As with the hemp, there's an important role that government has to play, which is providing information for the public benefit. So quite often it's difficult for private sector players to individually invest lots of time and energy in demystifying and understanding the opportunity and the sector. And so government has an important role to play to gathering and publishing relevant contemporary information on the industry, and publishing new and hot off the press reports. For example, after this report was produced, the IDC and the sugar industry produced their own very detailed and specific study on the alcohol to jet pathway, providing information on jet funding opportunities for the value chain development, and demystifying elements of the SAF certificate book and claim system. So the dynamics around the demand dynamics are quite different in different parts of the globe. The EU, there's mandates are going to be coming into force by 2030, which is going to mandate minimum levels of SAF blending. But in parts of the other parts of the world, there is what the non-compulsory or non-mandated industry, which makes use of a book and claim system that is a great enabler for investment and production in this industry. The sheer complexity of the opportunity does require some additional research. Some of these include the extent to which it would make sense for the country to mandate a local SAF blending mandate. Secondly, the cost of retrofitting local crude oil refineries for HEFA refining. This has been a popular approach in other parts of the globe, where they've taken crude oil refineries and retrofitted them to produce SAF from the HEFA process. I'm not going to dwell on the rest. In terms of financial support is always an important consideration. The Solaris plant, which has been listed specifically as a plant that shows much potential for this, there is a need to show that indeed it can be successfully grown in Mpumalanga at scale, and ideally on marginal land, because this has consequential benefits in terms of the greenness of the SAF that can be ultimately produced. There were some successful trials in Marble Hall that existed, which, as most of you will know, is right on the doorstep of Mpumalanga. So in all likelihood, it can be successfully grown in the region. To stimulate, it will be necessary to stimulate investment in alcohol to jet production from molasses and industrial off-gas, and in HEFA-based production. Again, as I said, the job creation potential is not as significant in the alcohol to jet pathway, but there are also consequential benefits in terms of processing and backward and forward linkages, notably forward linkages into the economy through those pathways. The other thing is to support the large-scale uptake of renewable energy for the sugarcane industry in Mpumalanga. It's the sugarcane industry in Mpumalanga makes use of irrigation. This is a detractor again from the greenness of any ultimate alcohol or a SAF that is produced, and so this would be a massive benefit. And there are a range of other financial incentives that could be created. Concessionary loans, contracts for difference, which could be explored. In terms of enabling SAF regulations and practice, SASO is a massive player and a linchpin in many respects in the South African and the Mpumalanga economy. Sasol could potentially play a large part in the lignocellulosic, so this is the Fischer-Tropsch process pathway for the processing of lignocellulosic waste, in particular the likes of invasive alien vegetation. However, it suffers, especially in terms of accessing the EU market, it suffers from strict rules around the allocation of those green molecules. Sasol has been lobbying for what is referred to as flexible allocation, and we believe strongly that if the South African government and has been supporting this, and I believe even the German government, representatives of the German government have been doing so too, if we were to continue to support Sasol in these efforts, it would dramatically enable Fischer-Tropsch production of SAF at Secunda and create a biomass value chain. And it would be a real shot in the arm for Sasol in terms of its journey of transitioning away from its origins of fossil fuel coal feedstock. It's important to develop a viable biomass aggregation network, especially if we're talking about invasive alien plant removal, which is a logistical difficulty, and supporting and securing offtake with jet fuel suppliers. And then lastly, I think I'm probably going over time at this point, water availability is something that can't be ignored. The government has a very important role to play here, notably enforcing pre-existing regulations as it relates to NEMA. Secondly, that there is actually a real benefit to supporting deregulating private water treatment. There are some particular dynamics around that, but as it stands, if a mining company in Mpumalanga is treating its mine-affected water, it is only allowed one customer, and that dramatically reduces any kind of possible financial return that they could make by investing in expensive water treatment facilities. So that sort of deregulation would actually have a dramatic effect in the province. And there's generally sort of coordinating investment in water treatment plants and supporting quantification and reallocation of water use allocations in the province to help solve that water availability and allocation dynamic, especially if choices are made that involve a new cultivation angle for the province. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. I'm aware that we don't have much time left. Our third opportunity is on the citrus value chain, and Sammy Pan will be presenting on that. Thanks. Over to you, Sammy.
Thank you, Kim. Understanding the time constraint, I'll be succinct. I have just been asked to start my video so everyone can see my face. Great. So first, just like everyone else, I will paint a general picture of the South African citrus sector. South Africa grows primarily 4 types of citrus. Oranges, which includes both Valencia and navel oranges. Soft citrus, which includes mandarins, or what we call nachis. We've got lemons and limes, and then grapefruits. The most commonly grown citrus type, as you could see in the slide, is Valencia oranges and other types of oranges. Grapefruits are the least cultivated citrus fruits in South Africa. And because Mpumalanga actually has a warmer climate, the province has a natural advantage in growing grapefruits and Valencia oranges. However, all 4 types of citrus that we've just talked about are actively cultivated in the province. And on average, every year, most of the citrus fruits are sold fresh, either to the domestic market or to the international market, but mostly to the international market. Only about a quarter, which is 25% of the citrus, is processed predominantly into juice concentrate or fresh juice. But there's a number of other processed products that could be made for each of the citrus type, which you could see on the right. So our research team finds that citrus could be a promising opportunity for Mpumalanga for 6 reasons, and I'll spend some time walking through each of them. The first is there's a strong economic rationale for the citrus sector in Mpumalanga province. So the citrus industry is already well established in South Africa, and Mpumalanga is the 4th largest citrus producer in South Africa. And South Africa also is the 2nd largest exporter of fresh citrus, just after Spain. So the industry reports also indicate that the future growth rate of citrus will continue to be pretty high, potentially at an annual compound growth rate of 7.73% in the next 4 years. So we think there would be even higher growth if the government could boost domestic and international demand for South African citrus through either market studies or industry-wide marketing activities. The second reason is citrus value chain is quite comprehensive and has a competent industry body. So what this means is that the multiplier effect of growing the citrus sector will be relatively large, and also the sector will have a solid foundation to solve some of the most complex constraints that are facing the sector, as well as to engage with the government. So the citrus value chain actually encompasses firms ranging from cultivar development to nursery, from citrus growing to citrus packing, from agro-processing to citrus exporting. And the industry association called the Citrus Growers Association is strong and pretty competent industry association, and works very closely with all the players in this very comprehensive and long value chain, as well as with the relevant bodies of the government. And the third reason is the job creation opportunities for the industry are, in our opinion, plentiful. This is not only because of the multiplier effect that I mentioned just now, but also because most companies in the citrus value chain engage in what we call labor-intensive activities. For instance, it is still more economical for South African citrus farms to manually grow citrus, care for them, and also harvest them. To put this into numbers, we estimated that for every million rands generated in the citrus industry, 5.22 jobs in Mpumalanga are actually supported. Now, with that said, there's one caveat, and that is there's some parts of the production that we have observed that are being mechanized, not only in South Africa, but as a trend across the world. And this includes irrigation, packing, and processing. So the fourth reason is a big one. So we find that in general, South African citrus export enjoys a relatively friendly export environment. So South Africa benefits from several regional and bilateral trade agreements with some of the biggest traditional markets. To name a few, so for the US market, we benefit from the African Growth and Opportunity Act, the AGOA, which essentially allows tariff-free export of citrus to the US. We also benefit from the preferential tariff agreement with the European Union. And recently, there has been some new developments where South Africa signs bilateral trade agreements with emerging economies in Asia, either East Asia or South Asia, which further de-risk the citrus export market for South African farmers and diversify our trade partners. So just an example, in 2021, China actually waived a phytosanitary protocol on South African lemons, which at that time was estimated to add an additional 325 million rand in new export revenue to the citrus sector and 800 additional jobs to the South African citrus industry. And lately, as recently as this year, we've seen new bilateral agreements between South Africa with emerging South Asian markets like Vietnam. Of course, on the African continent, our home, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is, of course, predicted to reduce this intra-Africa tariff on citrus products with other African countries and increase kind of more intra-Africa citrus exports. So overall, these are the reasons why we think South Africa citrus farmers actually have a generally welcoming export environment. Again, there's one caveat. Our biggest buyers for citrus are still the traditional markets, that's Europe and the US. And lately, there has been some unfavorable trade developments. For example, in 2002 and 2024, EU kind of unilaterally imposed additional phytosanitary restrictions that had a really negative impact on South African citrus exports. And in fact, South Africa has resorted to the World Trade Organization to resolve these trade issues with the EU regulators, but they remain unresolved at this moment. There have also been some political tension where the US threatens to remove South Africa from AGOA, which we all know about. And that's really frightened the citrus farmers. So it's really important to bear those recent developments in mind. The fifth reason, South Africa enjoys a competitive harvesting season when compared to other major citrus exporters. So being in the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa harvests citrus from March to September. This just misses the harvesting window of the major citrus producers in the world, which are all in the Northern Hemisphere. And that includes the number one, Spain, but also USA, Turkey, and China. The last reason is, so of course, we'll mention the financial kind of financing aspect of the opportunity. And what we have seen in the citrus sector is there have already been some successful implementation of the kind of innovative financing models to support the industry, which can be leveraged in the future. So I've seen financing vehicles like the Jobs Fund and the Economic Development Fund by the Citrus Growers Association. So these funds attract private investors to complement public financing as blended finance opportunities. So to name one example, in 2020, a program called the Black Citrus Growers Program was launched. There was a commitment of 300 million rand towards economic transformation of the sector. And this program was funded by the Jobs Fund, the Land Bank, but also relied on blended private sector financing from non-profit organizations like the Citrus Growers Association, the AgriSeta, but also on private banking sector, such as FNB. So now, having established the basis for supporting citrus sector for the Mpumalanga province, the question remains, how do we do that? So how can the provincial government better support the sector to realize both the economic gains, but also job creation gains? So we make recommendations from three different angles. The demand side, that is, how do we increase the demand for South African citrus? The supply side, that is, how do you increase either the quantity or the quality of the citrus exports? And then lastly, the enabling environment, that is, how do we ensure the citrus sector has a enabling domestic and international business environment? So these recommendations are based on the constraints that we have discovered in the sector, as well as any of the future trends that we have noted. They are outlined in quite minute details in the next slide, but given the time constraints, I will just provide kind of the summary slide for these recommendations. So from the demand side, our recommendations mainly look at ways to kind of finding new markets for Mpumalanga citrus through market studies or building a strong provincial brand identity for citrus, promotional campaigns, as well as trade missions. But there's also a need to support kind of training programs to help the provincial farmers to access new markets. And then on the supply side, our recommendation focuses on improving the quality of fresh citrus so that more citrus of higher quality could be exported at higher price. Now, a quick note on this that I think is worth mentioning. We are recommending the improvement of quality rather than increasing the acreage that is being farmed for citrus, because based on our stakeholder interviews, we noted that during COVID, there has been a flurry of expansion of land that has been kind of bought and dedicated to citrus growing. And a lot of the newly planted citrus orchards are still maturing as we're speaking, and they will not bear full crops until in a few years' time because of the long kind of harvesting period of new orchids. And given that the purpose of this project, as Kim mentioned, is to identify short-term opportunities, we don't think further expanding citrus acreage is appropriate for this particular context. And to improve the quality of citrus, we recommend that the government supports the adoption of shared netting, which would increase not only the yield of high quality citrus, but also the price of citrus. We also recommend the adoption of climate smart water saving irrigation technologies. The government should also help AgriSeta to implement subsector pest control skills plan to better prepare for any phytosanitary standards of the traditional Western market. And then from a citrus distribution perspective, our recommendations focus on the maintenance of provincial and municipal roads, improving the fresh citrus markets, potentially increasing the use of Maputo port, but also restoring South African port and rail capacity in the long term. Now, finally, from the enabling environment perspective, our main two recommendations relate to supporting farmers with pest and disease control to meet overseas phytosanitary standards and improving collaboration between industry and government in identifying the blended financing opportunities for especially emerging farmers. Now, in conclusion, the citrus sector is extremely export-oriented and a well-established sector already in the Mpumalanga province, ripe for further expansion and growth. And with demand, supply, and business environment support for the sector, we think there can be immense opportunities for creating jobs in that specific sector in the short term. Kim, over to you.
Thank you, Sammy. The last opportunity that we'll be discussing relates to the wood value chain, and I'll hand over to Paul Jackson, and I'm aware that we only have 8 minutes in which to complete this. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Just standing in for a colleague here. He's cutting it fine, so he might still join us and take the end of this. So wood, similar to citrus, is a strong, robust and successful industry in Mpumalanga. So it has a long history. It's an export earnings leader in the country. There are various aspects of the wood value chain that are successfully in place in Mpumalanga, from the growing and processing aspects. So some of the biggest processing plants in the world, notably the largest pulp processing plant in the Southern Hemisphere, being the Ngondwana mill, that's Sappi's mill. And as is clear, the climates, the topography, especially towards the low veld, is suitable, and the escarpment is suitable for the cultivation of wood for industrial purposes. Next slide. So job creation is actually, surprisingly, job creation is, in terms of job intensity, is actually quite high in the forestry industry. So roughly 7.4 jobs per million rand of economic output. A relatively modest number of jobs could be created in the industry, largely based on land availability. So our estimates, and based on the secondary research, that there could be roughly 8,000 hectares of new plantations, which would then create the associated jobs. And there will be also downstream jobs created associated with those new plantings. So there will be new plantations, as well as supporting what is referred to as category B and C plantations. So these are historically government owned and managed plantations, which across the country have generally and quite frequently been poorly managed, and as such, not much output is being seen from that particular land. Next slide, please. I think you'll have to click through. This one has some strange bullet. Yes, there we are. Oops. So one of the key findings, especially from the local market, and we hear this from the likes of the particle board industry, which is a major industry in Mpumalanga as well, sawmilling, pulp and paper. The common and regular refrain is that supply is simply not keeping up with demand. So those industries are desperate to secure greater volumes, longer term feedstock to support the large investments that they have made and are continuing to make in the processing of wood within the province. And so this is one of the reasons why, and in fact, we are in particular proposing that the cultivation part of the value chain in particular be supported. This is not without complexity, as I said, partly because a number of some of that land may be subject to land claims. There are still some water availability issues that affect all cultivation activities in South Africa, in Mpumalanga. The category B and C plantations, however, benefit from the fact that there are pre-existing water allocations that could be applied if only, in this case, the forestry master plan was implemented as intended, and that would breathe life into those category B and C plantations. And I think those are the main things that I just want to point out on this slide. Next slide. So what are the four main areas of support that would be most beneficial for the wood industry in Mpumalanga? So first of all, is actually replicating successful outgrow schemes and community private partnerships. So the large players, so your PG Bisons, your Sappies, your Mondis of the world, Hans Marinskis and others, have developed very successful outgrow schemes and CPPs. You've got organizations like the Vumelana Fund that support success in community private partnerships. So building on that success, making the necessary land available for that use, in particular, allowing for the reviving of category B and C plantations, and using those models in that context would be of great benefit for the Mpumalanga context. Support the dissemination of information and actively assist small growers. Of course, in the wood plantation industry, there is a long lag time between the point of planting and reaping the benefit of that wood. There are creative and new means by which carefully and compliantly established and managed forests can qualify for carbon credits and achieve early payments to overcome and mitigate the long growing cycle of wood. And assistance to small growers would be greatly beneficial in that regard. Enhance water access and resolve land claims, so support land claim issues where they exist. But again, community private partnerships are a useful means for overcoming some of these issues. And then advocate for the fast tracking and the implementation of the forestry master plan. It's an excellent master plan. It's short, it is to the point, and if concerted effort is made in this regard, it would unlock a great deal of success and investment in the wood and forestry sector for Mpumalanga. Thank you.
Kim, to you and your team, thank you so much for the very comprehensive report. I've allowed lots of additional time, but I think it was important for us to embed the massive amount of information that's contained within the report, hence the allowance to continue post the planned time, but I think the time was well spent. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next part of our agenda this afternoon, where we've invited three of our stakeholders to give us a perspective on the report. And first to the podium is, or the virtual podium is Carla Hudson. She's the Mpumalanga Green Cluster. She's from the Mpumalanga Green Cluster, a green cluster agency, and she's a program manager. Carla, over to you. You've got 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jacques, and thank you very much, Kim and team, for the report. I found it very interesting. I've read it quite comprehensively. So Basically, the brief that was given to us was we need to give a stakeholder perspective on the research, and I thought it was quite important, as stakeholders are all very different and have different mandates. I thought maybe just to introduce the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency, so that you can see what our mandate is and what basically our stance or perspective on this report will be. So basically, it's a relatively new agency. We became fully operational in 2022, and then it's a non-profit company which has got very strong ties to the Provincial Department of Economic Development and Tourism. It is the focus of the agency is very much to implement the just transition. I'm not going to put energy in there because I think we're looking at all three foundations of the just transition, which is the distributive justice, the restorative justice, and the procedural justice. So I think all of the elements that you've actually mentioned today did touch on that. So we are a facilitation and collaboration platform that was formed on the principle of a triple helix model of really strong collaboration between government, private sector, and then civil society. I'm relatively quite new. I only joined on the 1st of August, but I think it's a very exciting space to be in. So my comments on the research is, I think it's a very good start. Just also for your information, the Mpumalanga Green Cluster for the past 2 years has published market opportunity briefs, and that could be found on our website. And our focus is very much on water, renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture. I know that a lot of the discussion relies on the reuse of mine-affected water. I've got quite an extensive background in that. I worked for 6 years in the Upper Olifants Basin with all the coal miners and Eskom to have a look at that. We just must be very, very careful. We mustn't see it as a sort of a one shoe fits all. It's very specific to the mine and to the environment. So there's currently only one really successful pilot that was done in Mafubi on 16 hectares of land on maize. And it was in partnership with a private farmer, a big commercial farmer. And that would really be necessary because it's difficult to farm in the first place, and then difficult to farm with treated mine water. And the other constraint in mine water, if you have to treat it to potable, is the cost of RO, of reverse osmosis. So there is quite a few entities that's looking at passive treatment. One of them is Mintech, and they've actually looked at quite a good solution where communities actually can take ownership of that project. So we really need to look at passive treatment and fit for purpose water use rather than looking at potable. There is a potable treatment plant in Mpumalanga at the moment, and it's unsustainable with the volumes of water that we are dealing with. So we just need to make sure that we understand that it's not a panacea, that there is a lot of monitoring and still a lot of work that needs to be done, and it has to be done in partnership. So basically the value that we can add to all of this is that we've got a huge network of technical and policy contacts. Our board consists of representatives of all the major economic entities in Mpumalanga, so we have got access to that. The other thing that I've learned in my career is that you have to involve your communities from a very early stage. So whatever you decide that you want to do, I really think, I mean, the Mines has learned this the very hard way with their social and labour plans, just taking things to community without extensive consultation. People in Mpumalanga is very uncertain about what is going to happen with this move from coal. My other aspect is that I was wondering about is, have you actually looked at the reuse of coal? You know, because we can't really stop coal mining if you actually look at all the uses of coal. And I actually had a discussion with Sasol the other day, and we actually also need to look at how we can re-benefit coal. And one of the things that are being looked at is fly ash and REE, rare earth elements that can be used in the renewable energy space. So I was just wondering if that was a look at, and basically the cluster focuses on 4 entities, and the one entity that I think has been missed in the study is a circular economy. Knowing from the mines, there's a huge waste problem, especially from tires. And I think we really need to look at the circular economy and how we can actually deal with the waste, especially from the tires and plastics. That's currently a huge problem. Then the land use is very, very sensitive. I think as a South Africa land use is very, very sensitive. And then there's been quite a few successful land claims in Mpumalanga where there has been no support. And I think we really need to consider looking at these land claims and communities that didn't get the support to actually develop their land and see if we can partner with that. And then just my last observation is that we really need to look at the whole value chain and see if we can secure off-takers as well. And then the wood and forestry project, we've just become involved in a private sector initiative at looking actually how to restore the natural forests and actually become part of a carbon credit project. So I think this is a good base to start off, and I really would like to be part of further discussions, as I'm in the privileged position of actually seeing a lot of projects that's wanting to be looked at. So thank you very much.
Carla, thank you so much for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, Carla is from the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency. Carla, thank you for keeping to time as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we then move on to the next input. Professor, you need to excuse me if I pronounce your surname incorrectly, but I'm going to try in any case. It's Professor Christian Muzayanda. He's from the University of Mpumalanga, and he's an associated professor in the School of Agricultural Sciences. Professor, it's our absolute privilege to welcome you to the platform this afternoon, and kindly take the floor. Thank you. My apology again if I mispronounced your surname. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugo. Can I please share my slides? Can you please allow me to share my slides?
I'm sure the team at the back will allow you sharing rights. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, team, and greetings to all the people that are in the room. For me, it's really a great honor and a privilege to be invited in this platform. Thanks to the organizers. Colleagues, my name is Mzuyanda Christian, as I've been mentioned. I'm from the University of Mpumalanga, and I'm under the Department of Agricultural Sciences. So before I make my remarks, I want to just congratulate the team for putting in the effort in, putting this work together. As a researcher myself, I know how difficult it is to conduct a study of this nature. So for the academic point of view, we are really excited and we are keen to form part of the collaborations that are going to take place going forward in this project. So I have prepared just a brief slides presentations, as you can see in front of us, just to highlight the themes that were given to us, as a panelist to comment on. So these are the three things that I will start commenting on. I'll start with the stakeholders' perspective on the academic point of view, and I will respond on the opportunities that have been identified and presented in this platform, and how are we embracing this initiative as the academic sphere. So I will start with the background and the problem that has been, or opportunity that has been identified by the team that has put in the research. We know, colleagues, that the climate change is happening and it is happening now. So we need to find alternative ways in which we can grow our economy, we can draw our livelihoods from. And of course, it will impact on the issues that I've highlighted there, your water use, your energy, your infrastructure, and of course, the diversification of the economies that we have in our country. So we acknowledge that is the stance that we have as the university. And we also acknowledge that all these efforts, or all that impact that the climate change will have, will definitely impact on the economy that has always been stagnant or almost stagnant in the past or in the recent past. Now, if the impact will be felt across the country, it is more worse when it comes to Mpumalanga, because this is a province that has been dealing with high unemployment levels. And I have highlighted there that from Q4 of 2022, we have seen that there were high levels of unemployment, around 36%. And from Q1 of 2023, they increased to 38%. And this is way larger than what we have at the national level. So seriously, we have a problem in Mpumalanga. We are talking about youth unemployment rates. They are way higher, even at the, higher than the national level, as we have seen in the report. So here in Mpumalanga, the most people that will be affected, it's clear that it's the people that are coming from those districts, because they are already, having those coal mines, and they will be the most affected people there. But it's not really clear when we look at the numbers of people that are employed in those regions, especially in those coal mines, that whether they are really coming from that on those districts, or we have people who are coming outside of the province, coming in sake of job opportunities. So we really have to look into that as part of our study, so that we cover all the loopholes that might be available in terms of numbers. Of course, as this will affect the province of Mpumalanga, what is it that we can do, given that the Mpumalanga province has, the opportunity to expand on agriculture, to expand as well on tourism sectors that will not be affected by the job losses. Okay, so it's clear that we have to put our hands together as stakeholders and ensure that we derive this reality. Now, coming to the design of the study, which I've just looked at this week, I have noted some comments, or I have some recommendations to the study, that it was not clear how the communities were consulted in the study. I have noted that mostly the findings relied on the desktop research and data that is available in different departments. So it's not clear how the communities were consulted in relation to the expansion of those economies or those departments. So the models also that were used to estimate the number of jobs that we might get, it's not really clear how we derived those jobs, especially if we are talking about the industries that were not existing, it's not clear how we modeled to come up with those numbers. In terms of the short-term strategy, as your report is saying, that it is a private-led short-term strategy, it is not clear how we have put the timelines in terms of the achievements, how we are planning to achieve what. So I think it is very important to do that, because the estimation of jobs as well would rely on the fact that we are talking about 3-5 years, or we're talking about 10 years in terms of the timeline. So it's very important to also include that in our presentation. Also, I have not noted the issue of land redistribution issue, which has been very, very slow in our country, and it might impact some of the sectors that have been identified as the sector. So it has to be factored in our assumptions. So basically, colleagues, in terms of the opportunities that have been identified, we are noting the jobs that might be created in those industries. And of course, as an agricultural economist, I will be biased and focus more on the citrus value chains and indicate that we have noted the jobs that are to be produced in that sector. And we really have to take note that agricultural production is somewhat seasonal, and we should really propose the use of tunnels, the use of shed nettings. And I said that we can copy something on the model that is used in Almeria. This is a small city in Spain that I visited in June, July, and they're doing very well with the little resources that they have. You would not see any land that is arable there. They are using the shed nets, they are using the tunnels in order to produce, and they are the hub of citrus in the Europe continent. So we really have to look into that. Mpumalanga, of course, is priding itself in terms of the tourism sector, and we can even merge these two, agro-tourism and include the agricultural sector there, and to increase these jobs that might be derived from those two sectors. In terms of the recommendations of the study, we have noted that it only based their recommendations on the Mpumalanga government, and I really did not get why, because it talks about the private-led sector employment strategy. I really didn't understand why we put everything towards government. I think this is supposed to be a multi-stakeholder engagement or relationship. So we need to look into that. The study has identified the partnerships, but it was very, very difficult to look and find University of Mpumalanga. Guys, we are existing and we are growing very fast as the University of Mpumalanga. Recently, we completed our 10 years celebrations, and we think that there has been a lot of research and other activities that are done in the University of Mpumalanga, especially if we are talking about the Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Sciences and the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. So here to emphasize on our involvement, and as a call to all of you guys to include us in your initiatives, we have our our legs across these key themes. If you are talking about research initiatives, if you are talking about knowledge dissemination, capacity building, collaborations, and policy influence, we are all involved in that. If I may mention the few things that we have been involved in our Mpumalanga UMP, is that there are colleagues who are already conducting studies on the just energy transitions, and we have students that are undertaking research on that. So basically our findings and everything that we will be doing in terms of publications and conference attendance will inform some of the policy initiatives that can be undertaken by the university and the Mpumalanga Department of Mpumalanga Premiership or the Mpumalanga government. So we have all those things, and in terms of the collaborations, recently we have had an engagement with the Stellenbosch University and in setting up the Just Energy Transition Research Hub, which is in the pipeline of being improved soon. So please, we ask that you involve us in your engagement. I think that's it from University of Mpumalanga. Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the organizing team.
Professor, thank you so much for your input. And then secondly, thank you for keeping to time. We're running on a tight budget this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my privilege to invite our final speaker in terms of input on the subject. And it's my privilege now to invite to the floor the Deputy General Secretary of FAU, Comrade Vuka Chonoko. My apology if I mispronounced your surname, but thank you so much. Colleague, take the floor.
Thank you very much, and greetings to the rest of the participants. As you said, my name is Vuka Chonoko. I am representing workers who are organized in various sectors of our economy, but in the main, the food industry. So the larger part of the presentation, it's actually where workers that we represent are actually working. But also as a trade union, we are not necessarily representing workers in general, but we also speak on behalf of the unemployed, as you would understand that when we speak of job security, we just as much try by all means to give hope to those who are unemployed. So that's us. Now, I also appreciate the presentation. Our immediate reaction to this initiative is that we always appreciate when there's an initiative that revolves around job creation. But at the same time, we must also express the importance, part of such job creation initiatives, because we have, a particular experience of us having been directly involved in these projects. So the how part is very important in our case, because otherwise, at the end of the day, it begins to invite us to read that, the entire initiative ended up disregarding the very same rationale behind why we expressed creating jobs. Now, the one or two things I saw, or a few, should I say, I saw in the presentation is that the consultations, and I know some earlier speakers spoke about the consultation that, communities might not have been labor equally may raise that on the basis that, when it comes to job creation, you are talking to workers who are directly involved in various workplaces who may share important information when it comes to their experiences and whatever that the initiative is designed to achieve. All what workers will share is taken into consideration. So this is an immediate reaction that says from us as labor that going forward, if we can also be involved so that we can share our experience, we can also share our views going forward. Now, the one important point that I want to raise from the document is that there is less, in our view, there shouldn't be a separation of task in detail that is between the research that is designed to create jobs, as well as the research that will in the process reflect job losses as a result of transition. I raise this because when you are going to follow a particular transition for a good cause, of course, which we as labor ordinarily we don't oppose, except that if the process is such that it will contribute to job losses, that's where we become wary and would want to be part of such discussions. The document in itself raised to say it's not the mandate of possibly this work in terms of better detailing the job losses, but it is our view that, you know, if there is a research of job creation and it has an adverse impact that in the process of how these jobs will be created may also contribute because of the transition to a certain extent, you know, a number of jobs that will be lost. Our view is that it is important for us to have further discussion before implementing the transition, because what you want to do is to make sure that you are not, you know, creating jobs while on the other hand you are losing jobs, because it's very difficult to address the jobs that would have been lost in the process. I'll make an example because I saw one of the slides talk about the sugar sector. We have experience also in the beverage where there was an introduction of a particular tax, and the cause was also good. The rationale behind why some initiatives were good, but because in the process of implementing a sugar tax, it was going to contribute to job losses. So we had to advance a quick view to say, can't we at least discuss to alleviate these experiences so that by the time we implement the program that create jobs, at least we know that the existing jobs are secured. So unfortunately, it did not happen like that, and we ended up losing about 16,000 jobs, and to this date, they haven't been replaced. So there's that is the view that I want to advance to say, if the larger part of the research is not given to people who are doing research in terms of creating jobs, that in the process of losing jobs, how are we going to address that before implementation? Then to us, it becomes a project that workers will find it difficult to support, because we know that we are going to go back to communities being unemployed anyway. So I think it's important that we be part of the discussion so that we're able to share these experiences and also to at times sponsor some of our views, because I know that transition you know, may cause those, and more so that the document has reflected that. The other part is that when related to this is that there are already existing provisions and guidelines in terms of the legislations that we actually had with the government as well as all other stakeholders, including employers, researchers and economists and so on, in the early, should I say, mid-90s, when we were discussing understanding at the time that there's going to be develop or evolution in industries that will require us to make some changes. And this is one of the change that we're realizing. And at that time, we brought a discussion that led to existing legislations in terms of today what we call Skills Development Act number 97 of 1998, as well as Employment Equity Act number 55 of 1998. Those two provisions were a guide, both private and the public sector, that in the event there are necessities for us to change or adapt to changing conditions, be it technology and so on, we are able to be guided by those provisions so that we are able to avoid job losses in the process of any form of transition. So that's a very important point for us as labor. But again, I'm re-emphasizing our request that we be involved when there are clusters or discussions of this nature. So coal would be an issue in this regard. The other part that I noticed is the jobs that Paul was presenting, Jackson, and it's an important point of, I will not via the expressions of professor, because he took a very important point with regards to the number of jobs as to how the numbers came about. But what I can advance on this point is more about the jobs themselves. When we say we create jobs, what jobs those are? What types of jobs are we talking about? We're talking about understanding that agriculture may be a different sector or other institutions in the process of creating jobs. And agriculture might be seasonal, as it were. But you have other institutions that will be providing a supply to some products and so on, of some product and so on. But the question is, what types of jobs are we defining? These types of jobs that we are talking about, because if we don't, it means it will be difficult for us to have claimed to have created jobs. I'm talking decent jobs. That's what we qualify jobs in our case. So if it's going to be a fixed term contract of 3 months, should it be calculated in the research in that we have created jobs where someone will be there for 3 or 4 months and go back home being unemployed? What do we do? So we need to qualify jobs created to say what types of jobs these are. Are they seasonal, all of them, or some of them, are they permanent jobs? You know, because to a certain extent, in most of the activities that we have or discussions that we have with either private or the government, you'll find that we're always invited to, you know, to define these jobs, because, you know, we just give out the numbers, and then later you find that this was more of a project that requires lesser number of jobs than those that were presented at the initial stage. So I think it's important that we talk about the jobs. It should be reflected maybe in future, so it's clear that there is job security just as much. Because when you create jobs, you want sustainability, not only for the sector, but for contributing better to the growth of the economy just as much. The other point is the transformation, which I less saw in the presentation, and how I wish in future. But I'm hoping this is just a planned type or a broader type of a presentation. Maybe we are yet going to have a presentation that will be detailed, or a program of action type of a presentation, because I less see demographics reflected in terms of the jobs that will be created. I know that in Mpumalanga, when you create jobs, you need to also reflect the unemployed, whether the majority of them, are they female, are they males, and what is it that you are hoping to address the shortfall when it comes to addressing unemployment. So I did not see that part, but in our case, it should be part of transformation just as much. Maybe last, or because I don't, yeah, in the international front, I'm happy because I saw one of the presentations that you are doing well in citrus, the exports and so on. When you zoom into what is happening in Mpumalanga, it's a province that requires not only for workers to benefit from the positive spin-offs from export that would have been sold to either EU or other countries, but the project at least should also take a point or two as to how the communities in Mpumalanga will also benefit as a result of this, so that at least we know that the positive spin-off from the export is not only for purposes of reinvestment, but it's also for purposes of the communities benefiting in the process, which is directly related to what Professor was saying in terms of people who are in Mpumalanga, that we want the Mpumalanga people to benefit in the process. So we must know the stats, as it were. So maybe just to close, because I have lots of points here, and I'm told that you don't have much time. Maybe just to close with a strong hope that we will be invited in future in some of your discussion. But one is that we would appreciate if there can be further constructive dialogue to this before any implementation. And we would appreciate also that we engage in further research from what would have been raised by the earlier speakers. Thank you very much.
Deputy GS, thank you so much for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, before I open the platform for some questions, because we're running out of time, I would like to give Kim and her team just an opportunity, just maybe to respond on the inputs that were given by the stakeholders. Kim, can I hand over to you? And can I ask you to be succinct, please? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jacques. I'm not going to respond to all of the points raised. I would like to thank the discussants for their very valuable input. I mean, I think we as a research team are very much in agreement with all of the points raised, actually. I think it is important to delineate between, the constraint that we're faced with as researchers and what the brief is. Our research does actually fit into a much bigger picture around creating an employment strategy for Mpumalanga. And I'm aware that the PCC is doing various pieces of work around this. So I think it should very much be viewed within the context of a much bigger, more holistic piece of work in general. So I'm going to start with just, having that context in the back of our minds. Essentially, what we were attempting to do with this research was to identify areas that we feel provide a real opportunity for the creation of employment in Mpumalanga over the short term. And by short term, we define that as being between 3 to 5 years. I think one of the important things from this research that has emerged is and you'll see in our report where we detail some of the barriers and potential constraints to actually realizing that employment. So I think ultimately our view would be that we need to create an enabling environment for the private sector to come in and either expand existing production, go into new avenues of production. And in order to do that, we've quite clearly articulated what some of the factors are that need to be put in place fairly urgently. And that information is contained in the report. So yes, we are in agreement with all of the comments, and these are very valuable inputs. I think the comment that Carla Hudson made in the first discussant feedback was around, this is a good start. And I think that is our position as well. We hope that this report is actually taken forward, this research is taken forward by the relevant parties, and then it provides a good foundational basis to start. The Deputy General mentioned, moving now into implementation. Hopefully this is a good foundational source of information and data that can now be taken forward through to implementation. Chair, I'll hand back over to you for the Q&A.
Kim, thank you so much. Thank you for your inputs. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open the platform, but we have run out of time. But let's take 4 questions from 4 individuals, and I'm going to be asking the individuals to be succinct in terms of their questions, and then we're gonna let's see how we do with the first 4. But I think we're going to be running out of time. So, can I ask the Secretariat to assist me in terms of raising of hands on the platform so that we can then open the platform for them, please?
We currently don't have any hands raised.
Thank you. Oh, I see there's one. Can you guys see who it is? Clement, I have your hand. Can I ask you to pose your question to the team, please?
Okay, am I audible enough? Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you. Please kindly go ahead.
Okay, yes. I thank for the presentation from all the facilitators. I just want to comment, like for Mpumalanga, because Mpumalanga it's divided into many, high felt, low felt. But now on this hemp, hemp, people knows, because we know that hemp we call it marijuana, because on the African people, we have to know that there's a hemp, there's a cannabis, but in English, you divide it into 2 different things. There's a high and a low. But for people have to understand which one is the one which we're going to make job opportunities, and we're going to insist, because there's a hemp that always people smoke and always they should do rituals with it. But how is it going to be differentiated? Because we have to also implement our languages. So when you talk Zulu, mostly in Mpumalanga they talk Nguni. We have to also clarify that so that people must understand which one is the one which is going to produce. Thanks.
Thank you, Clement. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any other further hands? Kim, none seen at this stage. Would you mind just to attend to Clement's comment in terms of what type of hemp are we going to be using?
Can I ask my colleague Paul Jackson to respond to that on hemp? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Clement. Thank you, Clement, for your question. So the one under discussion today is low THC hemp. So this is less than 0.2% THC. That means that this is the I guess to use an old term, non-narcotic version of cannabis. So that's what we're referring to, and for sort of large scale industrial applications, as opposed to recreational or specific medicinal use for higher THC content cannabis. Thank you.
Paul, thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any other further hands? None seen. Kim, that means that you and your team did a very good job in terms of sketching the scenario in terms of where we're going to with this. And I guess it's a dividend on the additional time that we've allowed for your team to give that input to us. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Devin Pillay of the Commission, just allow me to thank everybody for their contributions. Kim, to you and your team, to the stakeholder inputs, Carla, Prof. Christian, Deputy General Secretary, thank you for your input. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Devin Pillay from the PCC just to close the session for us. Thank you so much for everybody's contribution, and thank you for your time. Devin?
Thank you very much. I want to thank you as well for volunteering to chair this session. And thank you very much for making time. Special thank you to the panelists as well for their time and the very valuable contribution. Equally important is all of the people that's on the call and their participation, in particular raising critical issues on the Q&A, which, if not already answered, will be answered later today. Chair, I want to thank the Genesis team, for putting together this report. Also for enduring hours of intense debates and discussions to leading to this excellent paper. What I think is important in this initiative is it's been broadly accepted by all stakeholders in Mpumalanga, from government all the way to communities. The initial part where we identified these 7 opportunities, all stakeholders during the consultation sessions over the period of January and February warmly endorsed the opportunities. While we were going through the consultations, additional opportunities emerged. And what this brings us to is that this paper is just a start. I think Kim has mentioned it, Carla has spoken through it. This paper serves as a start to diversify Mpumalanga's economy. It is building on the great work done by the province in its policy and strategy that it's developed over the past 10 years. Going forward, we must endorse and read the paper that we've done in relation to other work that's to be further developed. So that includes the work done by the World Bank, other DFIs, development institutions, all working within the space in Mpumalanga to diversify the economy. In doing that, we must also acknowledge and see the value of these economic diversification initiatives. They identify where future opportunities lie, and in identifying these economic opportunities, it also guides us in terms of the skilling initiatives that are to take place. And as we speak, a number of organizations are working towards meeting the skilling requirements for these new opportunities that are emerging. Some of the opportunities are emerging through academic research, similar to what we are doing, what we have done. Others are emerging through what we consider a bottom-up approach that entails a deep procedural justice approach. And even in those approaches, you're seeing these opportunities emerging and getting communities and workers towards these opportunities. What's important in Mpumalanga is as we develop these economic opportunities and build communities and workers, we are going to see certain levels of job losses. It's getting these workers that will lose their jobs for these new opportunities become extremely critical, while at the same time building additional resources and capacity of community workers, largely within the unemployed field, in the unemployed grouping, to take up these opportunities. So the broader economic strategy of Mpumalanga feeds into this. So it's not just about identifying the economic opportunity, but looking through the entire value chain and understanding what can be done to alleviate unemployment, increase employment, improve poverty and inequality levels, so that the province as a whole improves it's socioeconomically through the just transition. Chair, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone that participated in the event today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you to the PCC team. Take care, everybody. Look after yourselves. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.